Hey guys, I'm Adam, and this is week 6 of the English portion of our SHSAT tutoring session. And today's main my main topic is going to be analyzing arguments and claims. So like usual, before we get into this, I'm just going to cover some key tips that I think you guys should know for these types of questions. My first key tip is to find out what the main idea is, because these questions are similar to main idea questions. So you do need to look for the main idea, but then you're going to take that one step further and you're basically going to alter the text or change something or do all sorts of different things to strengthen the argument, to make the argument clearer, to support it better, all sorts of different things to basically support the claim and support the argument that the overall text is making. And that kind of brings us to the second key point, which is don't pick an answer that is too specific, because these are supposed to be on one hand broad enough to cover the entire passage, but also not too specific to the point where you can only apply it in one place. So you do need to have this right mix of not being super broad where it's almost not saying anything, right? You do want to make a claim and you do want it to be supported by the passage, but you don't want to be making a claim that's so specific that it's kind of only a subsection of the passage and not the general argument. And then my third key point is look out for signal words. So for example, therefore, this is why, all of these different key words and key phrases are basically going to trigger a summary or a thesis statement or all these different types of clues as to what the main idea is. And that will really help you, approach these questions and understand what you need to alter in the text to further support the main idea. And that is essentially what analyzing arguments and claims is. It just is altering the text to support the main idea of the passage. Okay, so with that, let's just get into some example problems. So this first one is actually an SAT problem, but it is a shorter passage and it's not that much more difficult than the SHSAT ones. So let's just take a quick look. John Jamesa, Robert Slay, and Ulrich Giemsa have hypothesized that the sail-like structure running down the back of the dinosaur, I'm not even going to try to say that, improved the animal's success in underwater pursuits of prey species capable of making quick, evasive movements. To evaluate their hypothesis, a second team of researchers constructed two battery-powered mechanical models of S. aegypticus, one with a sail and one without, and subjected the models to a series of identical tests in a water-filled tank. Which finding from the model tests, if true, would most strongly support Jimsa's and colleagues' hypothesis? So let's look at our answer choices. A, the model with a sail took significantly longer to travel a specified distance while submerged than the model without a sail did. Well, let's think about that. That wouldn't make sense, right? Because the whole thing that they're trying to say is that, here, let's see this. The sail-like structure improve the animal's success. So it wouldn't make sense that it took significantly longer with a sail than without a sail, right? That's actually the opposite, and we're trying to strongly support them. So that's why A is incorrect. Let's keep going. The model with a sail displays significantly more water while submerged than the model without a sail did. Well, does it really say in the passage that displacing water, improves their pursuits of prey, right? That's what we're saying, pursuits of prey. No, I mean, what we're trying to find is that the sail-like structure improves their capability of making quick, evasive movements, not displacing water, right? That's a whole different thing. That's not relevant. So we can remove B because it's not answering the question. C, the model with a sail had significantly less battery power remaining after completing the test than the model without a sail did. Well, again, this is kind of similar to B in that we're not looking for the battery power, right? We're looking for if the sail helps you make a quick, evasive movement, right? Battery power is a whole different claim. It's not something that we can really relate to this one. So why would it be C, right? That doesn't make sense. So by a process of elimination, it should be D, but let's just make sure. The model with a sail took significantly less time to complete a sharp turn while submerged than the model with a sail did, without a sail did. Well, that makes a lot of sense, right? A sail took significantly less time to make a sharp turn, which is what we're saying, evasive movements. Those are quick movements, right? Changing direction quickly. So we're basically saying here that the sail allowed the animal, the dinosaur, to turn faster, to make sharp turns, right? And that was actually better with a sail than without, which is what the researchers were arguing. So the answer is D. Okay, so now let's get to an actual SHSAT question. Here, I'm going to let you guys read this. So if you want to read and look at the questions, pause now, take a look, and unpause, and we'll go over it. Okay, so now let's look at our first question. 5. Which sentence should replace sentence 4 to best introduce the main claim of the passage? Well, let's just go to that paragraph. Sentence 4 is this one. The public library is a great place for people to get information, right? So again, before we review these passages, we always look at the first and last sentences. So here it says, the public library serves a truly critical role in promoting community. So we get the point of this passage is going to be, but this paragraph is going to be community, right? So I'll just community. Now, here we're going to see libraries provide certain amenities. So we're going to understand that this is about access to the internet, right? And now we know that public libraries also offer a variety of resources to community members. So this is provide resources. And now here, the last one, our conclusion, is saying the hallmark of a public library is that its materials and services are accessible to all. So here we're saying, right, it's accessible to all. Right, so now we kind of already understand what the passage is going to be about. So when we're looking at sentence 4, which says the public library is a great place for people to get information, well, that isn't kind of touching on all the points that this, essay is kind of talking about, right? This passage talks about promoting community. It talks about the internet. It talks about resources, right? And the fact that they're accessible to everyone. So just saying information doesn't make a lot of sense. So we're looking for something that does talk about community, internet, resources, and accessibility in our answer choice. So now let's go back to the answer choices and let's see which one of them actually shows that. So A, in this age of smartphones and search engines, the public library is a valuable resource that all members of the community should use. Well, that's actually kind of like a decent answer, right? Because it is saying that the first paragraph here is saying that despite the fact that a lot of people own a smartphone, which can be a very valuable resource, right? Like it says here, obtaining information is easier than ever before, right? But then it says, even with all these immediately available sources, one of the best resources for many communities, members of the community, also happens to be one of the oldest, the public library, right? So we're also looking at what was said before it says public library to understand where this passage is building from and how it's going to lead into the rest of this part. It's starting from, phones, right? So it's this sentence number 4 has to be a bridge from phones to the rest of the passage. So A does actually seem like a decent answer. Let's keep going though. B, finding information is easier than ever, but going to the public library is still a valuable learning experience. Well, it's not only a learning experience, right? It doesn't only provide learning, it also provides community, it also provides amenities, it also provides resources, right? It provides accessibility. So B doesn't really cover everything. C, though today's computers are highly advanced, the resources available at the public library are more useful for students. Well, again, this doesn't only talk about students, right? This talks about, all sorts of different people. It says here, an unemployed adult, right? It says all sorts of different people. It says book groups, town meetings, right? Those aren't all student activities. So this is wrong because it is too specific of an answer choice. One of the tips that I said earlier, you can't be too specific. And D, despite the proliferation of social networking sites, a public library is a great place for people who are interested in improving their community. Well, again, this only touches on improving their community, but there are other key things that are talked about here, right? Amenities. It also talks about resources, right? It talks about accessibility. So it's not only community. So D is also wrong. And by process of elimination, it's A. Okay. Now, a similar sort of question, which sentence would best follow and support sentence 8? So let's go to look at sentence 8. Here it says, the library stands in a rare position to help community members meet this universal need for human connection and companionship, right? So let's read the sentence before that also. And yet many people complain of feeling more isolated and alone than ever before. So basically we're saying people feel alone because of technology, but the library allows for people to have a sense of community. So let's go look at our answer choices. Libraries, which have been around for centuries and are found throughout the world today, help preserve the history of a community. Well, that doesn't make sense, right? That's not arguing. That's just kind of reiterating, restating facts, right? But that isn't it's not really a claim, right? That's not kind of arguing for in support of libraries. It's just saying that been around for centuries, right? They've been around for centuries, and they help preserve the history of a community. That's not making a claim. That's not supporting the claim we're trying to make, right? So E is wrong. F, the public library is often used as a place for community leaders and organizers to host community events, such as hearings or town halls. Well, let's go back here. This is too focused, right? Now we need a broader sentence, because here we're talking about, we're kind of going out. Here, we say, and yet many people complain of feeling more isolated and alone than ever before, right? So this is not a very specific thing. It's just saying, oh, people feel more alone because of technology than before. And here it says, the library stands in a rare position to help community members, right? So it's very broad. It's not talking about specifically hearings or town halls or community events, right? That's very specific, but it's not only for that. It's supposed to just act as an area. And generally, the last sentence of each paragraph should be very broad. So if we're adding a sentence, because it says follow, it doesn't say replace, right? If we're adding a sentence after 8, that should be a broad sentence. That shouldn't be a specific sentence. So F is wrong. G, libraries rely on a combination of local, state, and federal dollars to provide the kind of services and programs that community members have come to expect. Well, that doesn't make sense here, right? Because there's nothing about federal, local, state dollars at all, right? There's that doesn't flow at all with what came before it. Sentence 8 is talking about how the library, helps community members meet the universal need for human connection. So it's kind of out of the blue to start talking about money, right? So G is definitely wrong. And now by, process of elimination, H makes the most sense, but let's just make sure. At a public library, people can interact with others through a variety of programs, including teen book clubs, toddler story times, and senior exercise classes. Well, this is a good kind of ending, right? Because it just says people can interact through a variety of programs. And then it says teens, toddlers, and senior citizens. So it's kind of appealing to all sorts of different groups, which is kind of what the first sentence, the previous sentence is saying, right? It says the library stands in a rare position to help community members. So by arguing, that it helps all the different types of community members, that would make a good support for 8. So it makes sense to follow 8 with saying, oh, toddlers, teenagers, and senior citizens all benefit from the library, right? So that definitely makes the most sense here. Okay. So, our last question, which concluding sentence should be added after sentence 19 to support the argument presented in the passage? Well, let's go to sentence 19. So, sentence 19 says, the library connects people to a network of information and resources and is an important part of a community. Okay, well, this is just talking about the community, right? So, it's talking about resources, community, but but let's just see what answer choices can follow to kind of conclude everything and end it all up in a very broad manner. So, therefore, patrons of the public library can grow in both their social life and their level of community engagement. Well, this is too specific of an answer choice. The passage is saying, right, it says that, well, first of all, the passage is trying to persuade us to go to libraries, right? This is a biased passage. It isn't an informational passage necessarily. It also does have a leaning, right? It is trying to convince us of something and that is that libraries are important in today's day of, technological superiority. So, thinking of that, this doesn't really make that ending. It doesn't end on a very strong note. It says patrons of the public library can grow in both their social life and their level of community engagement. Well, that doesn't really, end the entire passage well. It only says that their social life and their level of community engagement can be grown. But that's not all they're saying. They're saying that there are resources that can be used. They're saying that there's so much more to a public library than just social life and community engagement. So we're just going to cross out A. Clearly, it is in the best interest of community members to maintain, support, and use their public library. That makes sense, right? Maintain, support, and use. And it is kind of arguing. It's saying, right, after all I've said in this passage, we need to take care of libraries, right? We need to, for the entire community, we will all benefit if we go to libraries. So B seems like a pretty good answer. C, after all, the public library has been a part of American community since the first library was founded in 1833. That's a very weird way to end this, right? We are ending super broad. A way to convince someone to go to a library isn't because we used to use libraries in 1833. It's because they benefit us now, right? So it doesn't make sense to convince someone to go to a library because we used to go 200 years ago. So C is wrong. D, in fact, community leaders must work together to find ways to generate more involvement in events at the public library. Again, this is not a very broad way because it's just talking about involvement. It isn't talking about, about the resources or the amenities like internet access that a library provides. And it's also kind of ending on a negative note, right? We want to be ending on a positive note. We want to be convincing someone to go to a library. This is kind of saying, oh, libraries need to do more, right? So it's kind of a negative note. So that's why I would say B is the best answer. Thanks you guys for watching. I hope this video was helpful. And as always, if you have any questions, please comment them and just make sure to keep watching. We're going to keep posting. And thanks so much. So see you guys.